It was a Friday night, the air filled with the aroma of freshly baked pizza as I embarked on my routine deliveries for the local pizzeria. Little did I know that this seemingly ordinary night would plunge me into a nightmare that still haunts my every waking moment. The address on the delivery ticket led me to a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where everyone knows everyone else. The house I was headed to was nestled at the end of a dimly lit cul-de-sac. As I pulled up to the curb, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house, though standing in silence, emanated an eerie stillness that set my nerves on edge. Grabbing the pizza bag, I approached the front porch, illuminated only by a flickering street lamp. The atmosphere was unsettling, with an unnatural quiet that hung in the air. As I reached the front door, I noticed it was slightly ajar, as if someone had hastily departed. Hesitant but committed to my job, I called out the customary pizza delivery. No response. The eerie silence persisted. I cautiously pushed the door open, revealing a dimly lit interior. The air inside was heavy, charged with a palpable tension that made my skin prickle. I navigated through the dimly lit hallway, the creaking floorboards beneath my feet amplifying the unnerving stillness. The uneasy feeling intensified with every step. It was then that I noticed signs of life: a half-empty glass on the table, a flickering television casting distorted shadows on the walls. As I approached the living room, a chilling realization struck me: I wasn't alone. A man, tall and disheveled, stood in the corner, his back turned toward me. My heart pounded in my chest as I stammered, "Sir? Your pizza." The man remained motionless, his silence adding to the growing unease in the room. I took a step closer, my senses on high alert. That's when he turned around, his face obscured by the shadows. I could only make out a twisted grin that sent shivers down my spine. With a slow and deliberate movement, he extended a hand, revealing a wad of crumpled bills. Fear clenched my throat as I processed the situation. What kind of person hides in an abandoned house, waiting for a pizza delivery, and greets the delivery guy with that unsettling grin? Trying to maintain composure, I took the money, my hands trembling as I handed over the pizza. The man's eyes bore into mine, devoid of any warmth or humanity. The exchange felt like an eternity, the air thick with an unspoken threat. As I turned to leave, a guttural whisper cut through the silence, freezing me in my tracks. "You shouldn't have come here." Panic seized me as I quickened my pace toward the door, the chilling words echoing in my ears. I burst out into the cool night air, the door slamming shut behind me. My breaths came in ragged gasps as I fumbled with the car keys. Glancing back at the house, I saw the man standing in the doorway, his twisted grin haunting my thoughts. With tires screeching, I peeled out of that accursed cul-de-sac. The image of the man burned into my memory. What had I stumbled upon in that forsaken house? The unanswered questions lingered, overshadowed by the undeniable fear that I had narrowly escaped something far more sinister. From that night forward, every delivery has become a nerve-wracking ordeal. It was just another night for me, a food delivery driver navigating the labyrinth of city streets to bring people their late-night cravings. The cityscape was a tapestry of dimly lit buildings and the occasional flickering neon sign, a comforting backdrop to my routine. Little did I know that this night would deviate from the mundane, leading me into the heart of a nightmare I could never have anticipated. The order came in like any other, a routine request for a delivery to an address that seemed innocuous enough on the outskirts of the city. As I made my way through the labyrinth of dimly lit streets, the GPS guiding me with its monotone instructions, a feeling of unease gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. The destination was an old apartment building, its facade weathered by time and neglect. The flickering street lamp cast long shadows across the cracked pavement as I parked my car nearby. I grabbed the food bag, the warm aroma of the meal wafting through the air, momentarily distracting me from the growing sense of trepidation. The building's entrance was dimly lit, the elevator out of order, forcing me to climb a dimly lit stairwell. The echoes of my footsteps reverberated through the narrow space, the air heavy with a palpable tension. I reached the designated floor, hesitated for a moment, and then knocked on the apartment door. The door opened slowly, revealing a dimly lit interior. A sense of foreboding settled over me as I stepped into the apartment, the door shutting behind me with a muffled thud. The room was shrouded in shadows, the only light emanating from a flickering television in the corner. I called out, announcing the delivery, my voice swallowed by the eerie silence. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I noticed a group of people huddled in the center of the room, their faces etched with fear. My heart quickened as the realization dawned on me. I had unwittingly stumbled into a criminal plot, a hostage situation unfolding before my eyes. A man, visibly agitated and wielding a weapon, approached me. His eyes bore into mine, the intensity of his gaze sending shivers down my spine. He spoke with a mixture of desperation and anger, explaining that they needed a way out of this predicament. My mind raced as I grappled with the gravity of the situation. I, a mere delivery driver, had become an inadvertent participant in a dangerous game. The hostages, a mix of terror and resignation etched on their faces, implored me to help. The weight of their collective fear pressed upon me as I stood there, paralyzed by the unfolding nightmare. The man, realizing my predicament, handed me a hastily scrawled note, instructing me to call the authorities and deliver their demands. My trembling hands clutched the note as I fumbled for my phone. The gravity of the situation weighed on me, each digit of the emergency number feeling like an eternity. As I spoke with the dispatcher, I relayed the situation with a sense of urgency, the reality of the scenario sinking in with every word. Time became a distorted construct, the seconds stretching into an agonizing eternity as I communicated between the desperate hostages and the authorities. The man, his grip on the situation slipping, vacillated between anger and despair. The hostages, their eyes pleading for salvation, clung to a fragile hope that hung in the air like a delicate thread. The authorities responded swiftly, their voices crackling through the phone as they negotiated with the captor. The tension in the room reached a crescendo, a symphony of fear and desperation echoing off the walls. I, an unwitting conduit for communication, felt the weight of the entire situation pressing down on me. The negotiation teetered on the edge of chaos, the delicate balance between resolution and tragedy hanging in the air. My mind raced with conflicting emotions, fear for my own safety, empathy for the hostages, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness in the face of an unfolding nightmare. Suddenly, the situation escalated. The man, his desperation reaching a breaking point, made a rash decision that shattered the fragile equilibrium. Chaos erupted as the hostages screamed, the cacophony of fear and anguish enveloping the room. The man's erratic actions reverberated through the apartment, leaving an indelible mark on the night. In the ensuing chaos, I seized a moment of distraction to slip out of the apartment. My heart pounded in my chest as I navigated the dimly lit corridors of the building, the sounds of the unfolding tragedy echoing behind me. I burst into the cold night air, gasping for breath as I stumbled down the stairs, leaving the nightmare behind. As the police descended upon the scene, I stood outside, a witness to the aftermath of a night gone horribly wrong. The building became a hive of activity, the flashing lights of emergency vehicles casting an otherworldly glow on the dilapidated facade. The weight of the night's events settled over me, a heavy shroud of horror and disbelief. The news later reported the tragic outcome of the hostage situation. The man, driven by desperation and a sense of hopelessness, had made a fateful choice that reverberated through the lives of those held captive. The hostages, innocent bystanders caught in a web of circumstance, faced a harrowing ordeal that would haunt their memories forever. I returned to the routine of my life, the echoes of that night lingering in the recesses of my mind. The city resumed its nightly hustle, the dimly lit streets a backdrop to the mundane activities that once defined my existence. Yet, the specter of that night continued to haunt me, a chilling reminder that the line between routine and horror is thinner than we dare to acknowledge. I'm not a guy who usually complains, you know? But that night, it was just too much. I ordered some takeout from this local restaurant. I won't name names. The food arrives, and it's cold. I mean, freezer burn cold. So, being a reasonable person, I leave a bad review. I didn't expect it to spiral into something out of a horror movie. The next day, I get a call from the restaurant owner. Dude's furious, accusing me of trying to ruin his business. I try to explain that it was just a bad experience, but he's having none of it. He goes on this tirade, swearing revenge for the stain on his restaurant's reputation. I figured it was just a disgruntled business owner blowing off steam. But then weird things started happening. Packages at my doorstep, no return address. Inside, half-eaten sandwiches, the same ones I complained about in my review. It was like a sick joke. Naturally, I'm freaking out. Who wouldn't be? My first thought is, someone's messing with me. But as the deliveries kept coming, it got darker. Notes accompanied the food, taunting me, telling me this was just the beginning. One night, I mustered the courage to call the police. Showed them the reviews, the creepy deliveries, the whole bizarre ordeal. They took notes, but said there wasn't much they could do unless there was a direct threat. It was just unfortunate harassment. Things escalated. The restaurant owner started calling me directly, his voice dripping with malice. He knew where I lived, described my daily routine. It was unnerving. The police said they couldn't trace the calls, prepaid phones, they said. I couldn't escape the dread. Every meal became a gamble. Even ordering from different places didn't help. The vengeful chef seemed to have eyes everywhere, making sure my dining experiences turned into nightmares. One evening, as I'm heating some leftovers, I hear a knock at the door. It's a delivery guy, holding a bag with the restaurant's logo. I didn't order anything, but he insists it's on my house, a peace offering from the owner. Reluctantly, I take it. As I'm about to dig in, I notice something odd. The food smells rancid. I open the container, and there it is, a dead rat, strategically placed like a sick garnish. My stomach churns, and I feel bile rising. That's when the phone rings. It's the owner, laughing on the other end. He revels in my disgust, taunting me about the special ingredient. I snap, hurling the container against the wall. But he's not done. He describes the rat's journey, how it was caught, killed, and seasoned just for me. I couldn't take it anymore. Fear had consumed my life, turning every meal into a psychological torment. I couldn't sleep, eat, or live without looking over my shoulder. The police were still powerless. In desperation, I deleted the negative review, hoping it would end this culinary nightmare. But the damage was done. The restaurant owner had crossed a line that couldn't be erased. I lived in perpetual fear, wondering when the next twisted delivery would arrive or if the menacing voice on the other end of the line would push me over the edge. I have worked as a food delivery driver for Tony's Pizzeria for about 3 years when this happened. It was usually a straightforward gig, deliver pizzas and pocket some tips. But one night, an order took me to a house that turned a routine delivery into a chilling encounter. The address led me to an old Victorian-style mansion, its eerie silhouette standing against the dimly lit street. The place seemed more fitting for a horror movie than a pizza drop-off. Hesitant but determined, I ascended the creaking steps to the imposing front door. The door swung open before I could knock, revealing a grand, dimly lit foyer. The air inside was heavy, a mix of mustiness and something more unsettling. As I stepped inside, The low hum of murmured conversation echoed through the halls. I followed the sound to a large dining room where an unsettling scene awaited. The table was adorned with flickering candles and ornate silverware, but the diners were what sent shivers down my spine. They sat in near darkness, their faces obscured by the shadows. A woman, clad in a long, flowing gown, beckoned me to the table. Her voice, sweet but oddly detached, instructed me to place the pizzas at the center. The diners didn't acknowledge my presence, their focus locked on the mysterious proceedings. As I turned to leave, the woman's hand shot out, gripping my arm with an unexpected strength. "Won't you join us?" she whispered, her eyes gleaming in the candlelight. Fear clawed at my throat, but I managed a weak refusal, pleading my busy schedule. She released her grip, and I stumbled back, rushing out of the room. The distant echo of laughter followed me down the darkened halls. I reached the front door, my heart pounding, and stepped out into the cool night. I glanced back at the mansion, half expecting to see shadows moving in the windows. But all was still. The unsettling dinner party was behind me, yet the memory lingered like a stain on my consciousness. Days passed, and the image of those shadowy figures haunted my thoughts. Who were they? What macabre gathering had I stumbled upon? My curiosity overshadowed my fear, and against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. Returning to the mansion in daylight, it seemed like any other historic home. No flickering candles, no mysterious diners. I questioned neighbors discreetly, but they claimed no knowledge of any strange occurrences. Doubt crept in. Had my imagination run wild? Maybe it was an eccentric dinner party, and I had misconstrued the situation. But as I walked away, a chilling gust of wind carried the distant sound of haunting laughter, a reminder that the mansion held secrets beyond my understanding. Nightmares plagued my sleep. Faces shrouded in darkness, the woman's haunting invitation, and the sense that something malevolent lurked just out of sight. I considered quitting my job, terrified that I might inadvertently stumble into a world of horror once again. One evening, weeks later, the woman from the mansion appeared at Tony's pizzeria. Her eyes locked onto mine, sending a shiver down my spine. She approached, a sinister smile playing on her lips. "You never joined our dinner, but we haven't forgotten you," she whispered before disappearing into the night. Fear seized me, and I confided in my boss about the disturbing encounter. He dismissed it as a prank or a misunderstanding, but I knew better. The mansion and its enigmatic residents had marked me, and there was no escaping the dread that lingered in the air. Terrified, I resigned from my job, moved to a different part of town, and tried to put the haunting encounter behind me. But the memory of that disturbing dinner party, the mysterious woman, and the chilling laughter followed me like a relentless shadow. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that I brushed against something otherworldly that night. Being a delivery driver for Dave's Burgers the last 6 months was an easy job. The routine of taking orders, loading up the car, and dropping off meals to hungry customers rarely involved anything beyond navigating city streets. That all changed on a chilly Friday night. I noticed the first inkling of trouble during a delivery to a quiet suburban neighborhood. As I stepped out of the car, I caught sight of a shadowy figure standing beneath a street lamp, their features obscured by the darkness. A shiver ran down my spine, but I brushed it off, attributing it to the usual jitters of working after dark. The feeling of unease intensified with each subsequent delivery. It wasn't just a single figure anymore. It seemed like a different person was watching me at each stop. Their distant gazes and furtive movements set my nerves on edge, but I reasoned that it could be a coincidence, a string of curious onlookers. As the night wore on, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. I became acutely aware of the headlights trailing me, switching lanes when I did, maintaining a steady distance. Paranoia gnawed at my thoughts, and the lines between coincidence and something more sinister blurred. By the time I reached the last delivery on my list, a palpable sense of dread hung in the air. The address led me to an isolated house at the edge of town, surrounded by dense woods. The headlights behind me lingered at the entrance, their occupants hidden in the shadows. I approached the house cautiously, the crunch of gravel beneath my shoes echoing in the silence. As I handed the bag to the customer, a sense of urgency overcame me. I needed to leave, to escape the disconcerting gaze of the mysterious followers. As I retraced my steps to the car, a rustle in the woods caught my attention. The shadows seemed to come alive, figures emerging from the darkness. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for the keys, the distant sound of footsteps quickening. The engine roared to life, and I sped away from the ominous scene, glancing nervously in the rearview mirror. The figures, now visible in the glow of the taillights, sprinted after me. Fear clenched my chest as I navigated the winding roads, the relentless pursuit showing no signs of abating. I contemplated calling the police, but uncertainty held me back. What would I tell them? A group of people was following me? It sounded absurd, even to my own ears. Instead, I focused on getting home, on losing the unnerving pursuers. The chase led me through deserted streets and darkened alleys, the relentless pursuit never faltering. Thoughts of the unknown assailants and their motives raced through my mind. Were they after me personally, or was I just an unwitting target? I dared not lead them to my home, opting instead to take convoluted routes through the city. The adrenaline-fueled chase felt like a nightmare, the line between reality and terror blurred in the rearview mirror. My phone buzzed with messages from the unknown numbers, each one more cryptic than the last. It became clear that this was more than a random encounter. Someone had orchestrated this pursuit with intent, and I was the unwitting protagonist in a twisted game. Fear and paranoia gripped me, my imagination conjuring sinister scenarios that defied rational explanation. Desperation set in as I contemplated seeking refuge in a crowded public place. The chase continued, my pursuers seemingly undeterred by the bustling city streets. I couldn't shake the feeling that their relentless pursuit was a prelude to something far more sinister. With a surge of adrenaline, I decided to confront them directly. I pulled into an empty parking lot, the headlights behind me slowing to a stop. As the figures emerged from their vehicles, my heart pounded in my ears. Their faces, once shrouded in darkness, were now illuminated by the harsh glow of the streetlights. To my astonishment, they weren't strangers, but people from my past, former colleagues, acquaintances, and even distant relatives. Their expressions ranged from stern determination to twisted grins. A wave of confusion washed over me as they revealed a shared motive: revenge for perceived wrongs, imagined slights, and ancient grievances. I realized then that this wasn't a random act, but a calculated vendetta. The pursuit was a manifestation of their collective anger, a nightmarish retaliation that left me shaken to the core. As they closed in, I understood that the real horror was not in the pursuit itself, but in the darkness that lurked within the hearts of those I had unwittingly wronged. The nightmare ended with their menacing presence and the eerie stillness that followed. Working the night shift as a food delivery driver for Big Bite Burgers was typically uneventful. That changed one evening when an order came in from an unfamiliar address. The GPS guided me to the outskirts of town, where the comforting glow of streetlights faded into an industrial wasteland. The address led me to an abandoned warehouse, a stark contrast to the usual suburban homes and apartments. The air felt heavy with an uneasy stillness as I parked the car. The silence was broken only by the distant hum of machinery. Doubt crept in, but the thought of a hungry customer awaiting their meal spurred me to approach the looming structure. The dim light of a single bulb flickered above the entrance, casting eerie shadows. I hesitated before entering, the creaking door echoing in the desolate space. Inside, the air was stale, and the only sound was my footsteps on the concrete floor. I called out, announcing the delivery, but received no response. A flickering light led me further into the labyrinth of crates and forgotten machinery. As I navigated the maze, a distant murmur reached my ears. Curiosity mingled with apprehension as I followed the sound. Turning a corner, I stumbled upon a scene straight out of a nightmare. The warehouse, once seemingly abandoned, teemed with illicit activity. Men in shadowy corners exchanged hushed conversations, surrounded by crates marked with symbols I couldn't comprehend. Panicked, I retreated, but my footsteps betrayed me. A hulking figure emerged from the darkness, eyes piercing through the dim light. Fear gripped me as I fumbled for the exit. The cavernous space seemed to tighten around me, every echo amplifying my vulnerability. The realization hit me. I had stumbled upon a criminal operation. Thoughts raced as I considered my options. Escape became imperative, but every step echoed like a drumbeat announcing my presence. My heart pounded in sync with the urgency of the situation. As I reached the exit, the silhouette of a figure blocked my path. Fear paralyzed me as a voice, cold and authoritative, demanded an explanation. Stammering, I explained the misguided delivery, hoping to diffuse the tension. The figure's eyes bore into mine, assessing the threat I unintentionally posed. With a chilling calmness, the figure signaled to let me go. Relief washed over me as I stumbled back into the night, leaving the warehouse of criminal secrets behind. The cool air outside offered a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere within. I raced back to the car, heart still pounding. The gravity of the encounter sank in, and a chilling realization dawned. I had narrowly escaped a criminal operation. Fear lingered, not just for myself, but for the unsuspecting customers who might inadvertently become entangled in the dangerous web I had stumbled upon. Driving away, the dark silhouette of the warehouse faded in the rearview mirror. The events of that night became a haunting memory, a testament to the dangers that lurk beneath the surface of the mundane. The delivery that led me into the criminal den became a cautionary tale, a nightmare I couldn't forget. The experience left me with a newfound wariness of the shadows that conceal secrets. My night started like any other delivering fast food. I grabbed the bags, hopped into my car, and punched the address into the GPS. The destination led me to a quiet suburban neighborhood. Little did I know, this delivery would plunge me into a nightmarish ordeal. The house, an ordinary two-story structure, stood in eerie silence. I hesitated for a moment, a feeling of foreboding settling in my gut. Ignoring the unease, I approached the door and rang the bell. It creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior. The air was thick with tension, and I could sense something was off. A man, presumably in his 40s, greeted me with a forced smile. He paid for the food but seemed distracted, as if his mind was elsewhere. I overheard hushed arguments and the muffled sounds of raised voices from within the house. It was then I realized I had walked into the midst of a family feud. As I turned to leave, a woman stormed into the foyer, her eyes ablaze with anger. She exchanged heated words with the man who had paid me, their argument escalating rapidly. I edged towards the door, eager to escape the brewing storm. Suddenly, the situation spiraled out of control. The man's face turned crimson, veins bulging as he lunged at the woman. Instinct kicked in, and I fumbled for my phone to call the police. The unfolding chaos echoed in the background as I desperately relayed the address and pleaded for help. The woman, now in tears, retreated towards the kitchen, desperately searching for something. The man, consumed by rage, pursued her, oblivious to my presence. I felt like an intruder witnessing a private hell. Just as I considered leaving the scene, a gut-wrenching crash echoed through the house. My heart raced as I cautiously peered into the kitchen. The woman had smashed a glass vase on the floor, grabbing a piece with a manic glint in her eye. The man, bloodied and bruised, stumbled backward, his aggression momentarily subdued. The police dispatcher assured me that help was on the way, but the atmosphere in the house had shifted. It wasn't just a family dispute anymore, it was a battleground. The woman, fueled by desperation and fury, advanced towards the man with the makeshift weapon. I found myself torn between intervening and prioritizing my own safety. The air was charged with menace, and the house seemed to pulse with a palpable darkness. I retreated to a corner, unsure of my role in this nightmarish drama. As the woman closed in, the man's demeanor shifted from anger to fear. He pleaded for mercy, promising to leave. But the woman's eyes bore a cold determination, and her actions were no longer rational. It was a descent into chaos, a descent I couldn't escape. The police arrived with a cacophony of sirens, breaking the tension momentarily. Officers rushed into the house, separating the warring couple. I explained what I had witnessed, my words a jumble of fear and urgency. The officers, trained to handle such situations, took control of the situation. As I stepped out into the night, the flashing red and blue lights painted a surreal scene. The neighborhood, once silent, now buzzed with the aftermath of a domestic dispute. My heart still pounded, the echoes of the turmoil replaying in my mind. I returned to my car, the smell of fast food lingering in the air. The events of the night left an indelible mark, a chilling reminder of the darkness that could lurk behind seemingly ordinary doors. The family feud had transformed a routine delivery into a night of chaos, leaving me shaken and questioning the fragility of normalcy. Days later, as I resumed my deliveries, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Every house held the potential for hidden turmoil, and the innocence of a routine delivery had been shattered. My job as a food delivery driver for a Chinese takeout joint was pretty routine. Navigate the streets, drop off orders, repeat. It was easy money until I stumbled into a situation that turned my mundane gig into a living nightmare. There was this regular customer, Mr. Anderson, who lived in a quiet neighborhood. Initially, he seemed like any other customer, polite, tipped decently, nothing out of the ordinary. But as the weeks passed, each delivery became progressively uncomfortable. It started with peculiar comments. Innocuous at first, he'd make strange remarks about how he appreciated my punctuality or how I seemed to know the neighborhood well. It gave me the creeps, but I shrugged it off as harmless weirdness. Then the comments took a darker turn. He began asking personal questions, like where I lived and if I had a family. Red flags shot up, but I played it cool, not wanting to escalate a situation that might be nothing more than an awkward customer. One evening, I arrived with his usual order. The porch light flickered, casting an eerie glow on the front steps. I rang the doorbell, my senses on high alert. He opened the door slowly, the dim light from the hallway casting shadows on his face. His eyes, once seemingly benign, now held an unsettling intensity. He invited me inside, an offer I quickly declined, citing my busy schedule. His smile wavered, and for a moment, I glimpsed a hint of something darker beneath the surface. I handed over the food, eager to get out of there. As the weeks passed, his behavior escalated. He'd stand a little too close, his eyes drilling into me as if searching for something. I started taking different routes to his place, hoping to throw him off my trail. But he always seemed to know when I was coming. One day, he handed me a note along with the money. It was a detailed account of my daily routine when I left for work, when I made deliveries, even the routes I took. Panic set in. How did he know all this? The sense of being watched grew unbearable. I reported the situation to my boss, but he brushed it off, attributing it to an eccentric customer. That night, as I made my way to Mr. Anderson's house, a sense of dread hung in the air. The darkness seemed to close in, the streets devoid of the usual comforting hum of the city. When I arrived, he was waiting on the porch. The note clutched in his hand, a sinister grin on his face. "I know everything about you," he whispered. Fear gripped me as I fumbled for my phone, ready to dial 911. He lunged at me, the note fluttering to the ground. Panic set in, and I fought back, my training as a delivery guy providing an unexpected advantage. We grappled on the dimly lit porch, the struggle intensifying with every passing second. In the chaos, I managed to break free and sprinted down the street, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear his enraged shouts behind me, the sound of pursuit echoing through the silent night. I ducked into alleys, took unpredictable turns, desperate to shake him off. Exhausted and terrified, I finally reached the safety of a crowded area. Gasping for breath, I dialed the police. They arrived quickly, but Mr. Anderson was gone by the time they searched his house. They promised to keep an eye on things, but the damage was done. I quit my job, unable to shake the paranoia that Mr. Anderson might be lurking around any corner. I moved to a different part of town, changed my routine, but the fear lingered. The nightmare he had woven into my life continued, leaving scars that time couldn't erase. To this day, I'm haunted by the realization that danger can lurk in the most average places. The ordinary act of delivering food became a descent into a horror I never saw coming. Every ring of the doorbell, every shadow in the periphery, serves as a reminder that some nightmares don't end when you wake up. I was just your average guy working a dead-end job, delivering fast food to make ends meet. It was a boring cycle, driving around the city, dropping off burgers and fries to people who couldn't be bothered to leave their homes. Little did I know, my next delivery would thrust me into a nightmare I couldn't escape. It all started innocently enough. An order popped up on the app, a burger, fries, and a shake. Standard fare, or so I thought. The delivery location was a bit sketchy, but hey, tips are tips. I hopped in my car, thinking about the measly tip I'd get for venturing into this neighborhood. The GPS guided me through dimly lit streets until I reached the destination, an old, rundown apartment building. Red flags started popping up, but hunger for the tip and the simplicity of the job kept me going. I parked and climbed the creaky stairs to the designated apartment. The door opened, revealing a guy who seemed normal at first glance. He took the food, handed me the money, and I turned to leave. That's when things took a dark turn. Suddenly, two masked figures emerged from the shadows, blocking my exit. My pulse quickened as I realized I'd walked into a trap. One of them held a knife, the glint of the blade sending shivers down my spine. They demanded my car keys, my phone, everything. Panic set in, and I stammered, trying to negotiate, but these guys weren't interested in words. I handed over my belongings, praying they'd let me go. Instead, they forced me into the apartment. It smelled of stale air and desperation. The masked figures interrogated me, demanding information about my life, my job, anything they could use against me. Fear gnawed at my insides as I realized I was at the mercy of criminals with no regard for human decency. The situation escalated. They bound my hands, shoved me into a closet, and left me there in the suffocating darkness. Hours crawled by, my mind racing through scenarios of escape. I could hear them discussing their next move, planning to use my car for a getaway. The closet felt like a coffin, my breath shallow and labored. Desperation set in as I strained against my restraints, hoping for a miracle. Hours turned into an eternity, and just when I thought I couldn't endure it any longer, they returned. They dragged me out, their laughter echoing through the apartment. My heart pounded as they tossed me back into my car, shoving me into the back seat. It became a surreal nightmare, speeding through the city as an unwilling participant in their criminal escapade. My mind raced with thoughts of escape, but my limbs remained bound, rendering me powerless. The tension in the car thickened as we approached an unknown destination. My fate hung in the balance, a cruel game orchestrated by these faceless criminals. The car came to a stop in an abandoned alley, surrounded by looming buildings. Panic surged as they yanked me out, throwing me onto the cold pavement. I braced for the worst, my mind conjuring images of violence and pain. But instead, they simply left, disappearing into the shadows without a word. I lay there, disheveled and broken, watching their figures vanish into the night. The nightmare was over, but the trauma lingered, a haunting reminder of how quickly a routine delivery could morph into a life-altering horror. I stumbled to my feet, shaking off the shock. The city lights flickered overhead, indifferent to the terror I'd just endured. I found my way back to my car, battered and bruised, but alive. I'm just a regular guy, you know? The kind who works the grind, living for those moments of peace when I can kick back and enjoy some good food. That's why, one Friday night, after a long week, I decided to treat myself to some takeout. I pulled up my Go-To app, placed an order, and settled into the anticipation of a delicious meal. The delivery time was reasonable, and I eagerly awaited the knock on my door. When it came, I practically leaped up, excitement coursing through me. Little did I know, that ordinary knock heralded the beginning of a descent into something I never could have imagined. I opened the door, ready for the aroma of my favorite dish to waft into the room. Instead, what hit me was a grotesque and twisted version of my order. My favorite pasta dish had been mutilated, the once savory sauce now resembling something more sinister. It looked like a crime scene on a plate. My confusion morphed into disbelief, then anger. Who would do such a thing? Did the restaurant mess up, or was this some sick joke from a disgruntled chef? As I inspected the food, a chill ran down my spine. There, tucked in the box, was a note, scrawled in a chaotic hand. "Enjoy your meal, pal." This was no mistake. Someone had a vendetta against me. But why? I'm just a regular Joe, right? Questions raced through my mind, but the one that lingered was, who would go to such lengths to ruin a simple takeout order? As the night deepened, so did my unease. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to conceal unseen eyes, and the air felt charged with malevolence. The notes continued, arriving at my doorstep, slipped under my door, always taunting and twisted. It was like a game, and I was the unwitting player. Days turned into nights, each filled with mounting dread. I reported the incidents, but without concrete evidence, the police couldn't do much. The twisted mind orchestrating this campaign against me remained hidden, leaving me vulnerable and terrified. Sleep became a distant memory as paranoia took hold. I questioned every face on the street, every passerby, wondering if they were the one behind the sickening notes and the vandalized meals. The lines between reality and nightmare blurred, and I found myself on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder. One evening, as I returned home, the atmosphere shifted. A shadowy figure loitered near my building. Fear gripped me as they stepped into the light, revealing a face contorted with malice. It was the delivery driver from that fateful night, the twisted architect of my torment. He approached with a twisted smile, reveling in my terror. He spoke in disjointed sentences, a distorted narrative of perceived slights and imagined grievances. His eyes gleamed with a frenzied intensity, and I realized I was dealing with someone unhinged, someone who had fixated on me with a level of obsession that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to reason with him, to understand why my simple desire for takeout had unleashed this nightmare. But reason had no place in his world. He lunged at me, a scream tearing from my throat as the horror reached its climax. The twisted dance of vengeance and terror that had begun with a vandalized meal now escalated to a violent confrontation. It's hard to describe the chaos that followed, the struggle, the fear, the desperate fight for survival. The police were called, the assailants subdued, but the scars of that night lingered. The nightmare may have ended, but its echoes reverberated in my sleepless nights and haunted dreams. I'm just a guy making ends meet, working as a delivery driver for a local restaurant. Most nights, it's routine: take orders, navigate the city, and drop off food. Easy, right? That changed one chilly evening when I got an order for a rooftop gathering. The directions led me to an unassuming building. I made my way up the stairs, box in hand, thinking it was just another casual get-together. When I reached the rooftop, I noticed the atmosphere shift. It wasn't the usual laughter and chatter you'd expect. It felt tense, like the air had thickened with something ominous. A group of people huddled in the shadows, their faces obscured by the dim lighting. I dismissed it, thinking maybe they were just camera shy or avoiding the cold wind. I handed over the food, exchanged pleasantries, and turned to leave. That's when things took a dark turn. As I reached the stairwell, one of them called out, "Wait." I froze, turning back to see a figure stepping into the feeble light. He was dressed in dark clothes, the hood of his jacket casting a sinister shadow over his face. His eyes bore into me, and a shiver ran down my spine. He approached with an unsettling smile and gestured for me to come closer. Alarm bells rang in my head, but I couldn't pinpoint why. The group formed a circle around me, trapping me on that rooftop. Panic set in as I realized this wasn't a regular delivery, it was a setup. The man in the hood spoke cryptically about their purpose and their need for someone like me. Fear gripped me, but before I could react, they revealed their true intentions. In that moment, the rooftop transformed into a nightmarish scene. They weren't here for a meal, they were here for something far more sinister. The group circled me, their faces devoid of empathy. Their whispered conversations sent chills down my spine. I tried to reason with them, to understand what they wanted, but their words were veiled in malice and obscured by a chilling determination. As they closed in, I glimpsed a table covered in strange objects, sharp tools, makeshift restraints, and a darkness that hinted at unspeakable acts. Panic surged through me as I realized the magnitude of the danger I was in. I wasn't just a delivery guy anymore, I was prey in a twisted game. Desperation fueled my fight or flight instincts. Adrenaline surged as I made a run for the stairs. They pursued, their malevolent whispers growing louder. My heart raced, my breath shallow, as I descended each step. But the rooftop wasn't the end, it was just the beginning of a nightmarish pursuit. I reached the ground floor and sprinted into the cold night, the echoes of their footsteps fading behind me. Fear fueled my legs, propelling me through the city streets. The unknown danger lingered, a shadow in pursuit, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled into something far darker than a routine delivery. In the days that followed, paranoia clung to me like a relentless specter. Every shadow, every unfamiliar face, stirred the memories of that rooftop encounter. I reported the incident, but the police couldn't find any leads. The group, their faces forever etched in my mind, remained a malevolent mystery. The experience changed me. No longer just a delivery guy, I became a witness to something insidious, a survivor haunted by the realization that, in the ordinary act of delivering food, I had unwittingly stepped into the realm of nightmares. Another night, another delivery. The address seemed like any other, and I grabbed the nondescript package, tossing it into the back of my car without a second thought. Little did I know, this routine delivery would hurl me into the heart of a chilling kidnapping plot. As I navigated the quiet streets, the city's dim glow casting long shadows, I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling. The weight of the package in the trunk felt like a looming presence, and a sense of foreboding crept over me. Still, I brushed it off, attributing it to a long day and an overactive imagination. I pulled up to the given address, a seemingly ordinary house nestled in a suburban neighborhood. The instructions were simple: leave the package on the porch and ring the doorbell. No face-to-face interaction required. I followed the routine, leaving the package and stepping back. Just as I turned to leave, the door creaked open, revealing a figure cloaked in shadows. The pale light from the porch barely illuminated their face, leaving their features obscured. I caught a glimpse of desperation in their eyes as they muttered a hurried thank you before disappearing back into the darkness. I shrugged off the odd encounter, attributing it to the peculiarities of late-night deliveries. Little did I know, that package held more than just the usual contents. It harbored a sinister secret. As I continued my route, I noticed an unmarked van tailing me, its headlights a menacing presence in my rearview mirror. Paranoia set in. Were they following me? Or was it just a coincidence? I tried to shake the feeling, telling myself it was nothing more than nerves. But as I made turns, the van mirrored my every move, its persistence casting a pall of dread over the night. My phone buzzed, jolting me from my thoughts. A text message, devoid of a sender's name, revealed a chilling truth. I had unwittingly become a pawn in a kidnapping plot. The package I delivered was a ransom, and the van tailing me was the kidnappers, ensuring the drop-off went smoothly. Panic set in as I grappled with the gravity of the situation. The text threatened harm to the victim if I alerted the authorities. Fear constricted my chest, and I felt the weight of responsibility for a life hanging in the balance. I wrestled with the options, torn between the moral obligation to save a life and the very real danger that lurked. The van's proximity never wavered, a constant reminder of the imminent threat. The next text brought clarity. It included a photo of the captive, bound and terrified. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I weighed the consequences of my actions. The night air grew thick with tension as I steered toward a secluded location per the kidnapper's instructions. A desolate warehouse on the outskirts of town awaited, its looming silhouette a sinister backdrop to the unfolding drama. The van pulled alongside me, and masked figures emerged, their faces hidden in the shadows of the night. They took the package and left, leaving me to grapple with the moral cost of my compliance. The van melted back into the city's darkness, leaving me alone with the haunting echoes of the night. I called the police, confessing my unwitting involvement. They arrived, their questions probing the depths of my terror-filled night. Guilt gnawed at me, knowing I had played a role in the machinations of a criminal plot. As dawn broke, the warehouse stood silent, a haunting testament to the night's events. The police assured me that my cooperation had aided their investigation, but the weight of that night clung to me like a shadow. Days turned into sleepless nights as the ordeal replayed in my mind. I became hyper-aware of every package, every unfamiliar face on the street. The boundaries between routine and danger blurred, and the city, once familiar, now held hidden perils. My job as a delivery guy on Uber Eats usually involves normal stuff: pizzas, burgers, the regular. This one night, though, everything took a wild turn. I got an order that seemed like any other, just a name and an address. Little did I know, it was a setup for a night I'd never forget. The order was for a fancy Italian place. Classy, right? The instructions said to deliver it to an address in an upscale neighborhood. Nothing out of the ordinary. I double-checked the items and headed to the destination. Just another routine delivery, or so I thought. The house was tucked away in the shadows of towering trees. I hesitated, thinking I might have taken a wrong turn, but then I spotted the right number. As I approached, a chill ran down my spine. There was something off about the place, a subtle air of secrecy that hung in the dimly lit surroundings. I rang the doorbell, and it swung open slowly. A woman stood there, bathed in an eerie, dim light. Her eyes, dark and intense, seemed to hold a secret. She paid, smiled, and invited me inside for a tip. Now, this was unusual, but she seemed harmless, right? The inside was dimly lit, too, with red drapes that hinted at a secret rendezvous vibe. As I awkwardly stood there, she handed me a tip, slipping an envelope into my hand. Then she whispered something about being discreet, about how this was our secret. I froze. It dawned on me. I was part of something way more complex than just delivering pasta. As I made my way out, the door creaked, and there he was, a man, her husband, or maybe someone else. Anger flashed in his eyes as he glared at me. The atmosphere shifted from secret romance to impending doom. The woman tried to calm him, but it was like pouring water on a raging fire. I rushed out, feeling their heated argument echoing behind me. The envelope she slipped me burned in my pocket. It wasn't a tip, it was hush money, the kind that whispered danger. Panic set in as I realized I was in the middle of a lover's quarrel, one that could explode into something far more dangerous. I sped away, my mind racing with thoughts of what I'd witnessed. The woman's desperate eyes, the man's furious glare. I was a pawn in their game, a witness to something that could end in tragedy. My heart pounded as I wondered if my involvement would put me in the crossfire. Days passed, and I couldn't shake the fear. I thought about reporting it, but who would believe a delivery guy caught up in a dangerous love affair? The envelope she slipped me, with a hefty sum of cash, became a haunting reminder of a night that went from ordinary to terrifying. The news soon flashed a headline, a crime of passion, they called it. A woman found dead, a man on the run. The same upscale neighborhood, the same house, the one I delivered that cursed order to. The pieces fell into place, and I realized my role in their dark drama. The police questioned me, and I spilled the details, the secret rendezvous, the whispered words, the deadly consequences. I became a reluctant witness, my simple delivery turning into a testimony in a court of law. The fear lingered, the realization that an innocent delivery could thrust me into a world of deadly secrets. The trial unfolded, a theater of accusations, betrayal, and consequences. I became the guy who unwittingly delivered tragedy, a pawn in a game of dangerous passion. The woman's eyes haunted my dreams, the man's glare a constant reminder of a night that went from delivering pasta to delivering a dark tale of love gone wrong. In the end, justice prevailed, but the nightmares persisted. Every delivery felt like a potential plunge into another clandestine affair, another unraveling tragedy. The envelope she slipped me, once a symbol of secrecy, became a sinister relic, a reminder that sometimes, delivering more than just food can lead you into the heart of a nightmare. I am the type of guy who orders pizza when the day's been too long and cooking is just too much effort. So, there I was, scrolling through the pizza joint's app, picking out my usual, nothing fancy. A couple of clicks, and the order was on its way. The estimated delivery time was about 30 minutes, so I settled in, flipped on the TV, and let the anticipation build. It was all going smoothly, just another routine pizza night. Until the doorbell rang. I opened the door, expecting the usual pizza guy, maybe with a friendly smile or an awkward joke. But this time, he handed me the pizza box with a note attached. A note that would turn this regular night into something I'd never forget. The note was handwritten, scrawled in messy letters. It started innocently enough, thanking me for being a loyal customer and how they appreciated my regular orders. So far, so good, right? But then it took a chilling turn. The note described details about my apartment, the color of my curtains, the framed picture on the wall, even the layout of my living room. My heart pounded. How did this delivery guy know these things? My mind raced through all the pizza nights, all the times I thought I was alone. Was I being watched? Fear gripped me as I read on. The note claimed the delivery guy had been secretly observing me for weeks. He knew my routine, my habits. It felt like a violation, an invasion of my privacy that turned my safe space into a haunting nightmare. I glanced at the pizza guy, who wore a nonchalant expression like he was just dropping off any other order. I stammered out a thank you, trying to mask the fear and confusion that consumed me. The door closed, but the weight of that note lingered. Every creak in the apartment became a potential signal of an unwelcome visitor. I questioned my every move, wondering if unseen eyes were watching. Paranoia seeped into my daily life, turning the comfort of my own home into a prison of anxiety. Nights were the worst. The darkness outside seemed to conceal more than just shadows. I double-checked locks and peeked through curtains, half expecting to see a silhouette watching from afar. Sleep became elusive, my mind plagued by the idea that someone out there knew more about me than I knew about myself. Days turned into weeks, and the pizza deliveries continued, each one accompanied by a note with increasingly detailed observations. I debated calling the police, but what could I say? Hey, there's a pizza guy who claims to know the color of my toothbrush. One evening, as I nervously opened the door to yet another delivery, the pizza guy handed me a note with a sinister grin. This one was different. It wasn't a list of observations, it was a threat. The words sent shivers down my spine, promising to reveal my every secret if I dared to involve the authorities. Terrified and cornered, I decided to confront the pizza guy. I demanded an explanation, asked him why he was tormenting me. His response was a cold, haunting laugh that echoed in my nightmares. He reveled in the power he held, the fear he instilled. I couldn't take it anymore. I moved, changed my routines, and tried to erase the fear that had gripped me. But the memory of those notes, the invasion of my privacy, lingered like a stain that wouldn't fade. In the end, I never found out who the pizza guy was or why he chose me as his target. The fear of being watched never truly left. Every pizza delivery became a potential threat, a reminder of that nightmare that turned a simple order into an invasion of my life. You know, I'm just a regular guy who enjoys the simplicity of life. Sometimes, after a long day, I treat myself to a good old kebab. So there I was, lounging on my couch, waiting for my savory delight to arrive. The doorbell rang, and I expected the usual exchange with the delivery guy, a quick transaction, and then back to my evening. I opened the door, greeted the delivery guy with a nod, and took the bag containing my beloved kebab. Everything seemed normal, routine, until I noticed something unsettling in his eyes. A glint of something off, something that sent a chill down my spine. After closing the door, I heard footsteps inside my apartment. Panic set in. Was I hearing things? No, there it was again, the unmistakable sound of someone moving around. My heart raced as I cautiously approached the kitchen. To my horror, there he was, the delivery guy, standing in my kitchen as if he owned the place. I was paralyzed, trying to make sense of the situation. He must have thought I was an easy target, alone in my apartment, unsuspecting. But little did he know, I wasn't about to be a victim. A surge of adrenaline replaced my initial shock. I confronted him, demanding to know why he was inside my home without permission. His response was nothing but a sinister grin, like he was reveling in the fear he was instilling. Realization struck: this wasn't just a delivery gone wrong, it was a full-blown invasion. I could feel the fight or flight response kicking in, and flight wasn't an option. My only choice was to stand my ground and protect my home. He lunged at me, and the struggle began. It was a chaotic mess of fists and desperation. I fought with everything I had, the taste of my kebab now a distant memory. The struggle moved through rooms, knocking over furniture, each thud echoing the intensity of our fight. At one point, I managed to push him away, creating just enough space to grab my phone and dial 911. The operator's voice on the other end was a lifeline, a reassurance that help was on the way. But until they arrived, it was just me and him, locked in a battle for control of my own home. I couldn't comprehend why a simple kebab delivery turned into a fight for survival. Was it a random act of violence, or did this guy have some twisted motive? Questions raced through my mind, but there was no time for answers in the midst of the struggle. Eventually, the sound of sirens outside signaled the cavalry's arrival. The police stormed in, apprehending the intruder and securing the scene. I stood there, battered and shaken, watching as they escorted him away. The aftermath was a blur: statements, questioning, and trying to regain a sense of normalcy. My once safe haven had been violated, and the fear lingered long after the police left. Every creak and rustle became a potential threat, a reminder that danger could breach the sanctity of home. I never got a clear answer on why that delivery guy chose my place for his twisted intrusion. Maybe it was a sick game, a thrill he sought. What I did know was that a routine evening had transformed into a nightmare, leaving scars that went beyond the physical. From that day on, I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, forever changed by an unexpected fight for survival that turned a mundane kebab delivery into a chilling encounter with the darker side of humanity. Life as a delivery driver, it's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. There was this one time, though, that took a dark turn. I had delivered cold food to a customer the week before, a simple mistake in the chaos of my deliveries. Little did I know, that blunder would unleash a nightmarish ordeal that I wouldn't wish upon anyone. It was just another routine night. I grabbed the pizza, hopped in my car, and drove to the address. The house was tucked away in the shadows, a lone porch light barely illuminating the entrance. As I approached, a chill ran down my spine. Maybe it was the ominous atmosphere or just the nerves from the previous week's mishap. The door creaked open slowly, and I hesitated for a moment. I handed over the pizza, apologized for the previous cold delivery, and hoped to make amends. The customer, a tall guy with a stoic expression, took the pizza without saying a word. I thought that was the end of it, but oh boy, was I wrong. As I left, I noticed a subtle unease settling in. My car seemed colder, and the night darker. It wasn't until I reached my next delivery that things started to unravel. A series of mysterious calls started flooding my phone. Unknown numbers, heavy breathing, and cryptic messages that hinted at something sinister. Unease transformed into dread as I realized someone was toying with me. Every turn of my car felt like a step deeper into a nightmare. It was a cold sweat kind of fear, the kind that grips you, paralyzes you. I wanted to shake it off, but the sinister atmosphere lingered. Then came the directions. The mysterious caller guided me to a desolate, dimly lit alley. My gut screamed danger, but it was as if some invisible force compelled me forward. The delivery address led to an abandoned warehouse, a place where shadows danced menacingly in the dim light. As I approached the entrance, the ominous silence was shattered by a blood-curdling scream. It echoed, reverberating through the warehouse like a haunting symphony. Panic set in, and I questioned every decision that brought me to this nightmare. The warehouse, once just a backdrop for deliveries, became a labyrinth of terror. My footsteps echoed in the vast emptiness, each sound magnified by the oppressive silence. It was then that I saw it, a figure in the distance, obscured by shadows. My heart pounded as I tried to make out its features. The figure beckoned, leading me deeper into the abyss. I hesitated, my mind urging me to flee, but curiosity, or perhaps sheer terror, pushed me forward. The air became thick, a suffocating weight on my chest. With each step, the temperature dropped, and a bone-chilling dread settled in. Then, a blinding light pierced the darkness, revealing a scene that will forever haunt my nightmares. The customer from the previous week stood there, surrounded by flickering candles and twisted, contorted figures wearing masks. My pulse raced as I realized this was payback, revenge served cold. The figures advanced, their masks concealing any trace of humanity. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled backward, desperately searching for an exit. The air became thick with an indescribable tension, a palpable malevolence that clung to every corner. As I turned to run, the figures closed in, their laughter echoing like a cacophony of madness. My breaths were ragged, my heart raced, and the warehouse seemed to tighten its grip. Escape felt impossible, the walls closing in as if conspiring with the ominous figures. In the end, I don't know how I got out of that warehouse. It's all a blur, a feverish nightmare that unfolded in the shadows. The twisted laughter, the masks, the haunting atmosphere, it all melted into a horrifying symphony of terror. Being a delivery driver for Chicken Plus, a local fried chicken joint, sounds a lot more fun than it actually is. My nights usually consist of navigating dark streets with nothing but the glow of street lamps and the smell of crispy chicken wafting through my car. One evening, though, things took a turn into the twilight zone. It was a routine delivery, an order for a family-sized chicken bucket, extra crispy. The address led me to an old house at the edge of town, one of those places that looked like it held secrets in its creaky floorboards. I grabbed a chicken bucket, wiped my sweaty hands on my uniform, and marched to the door. The porch light flickered ominously as I knocked. The door creaked open, revealing a couple straight out of a vintage horror flick. They had this strange aura, like they didn't belong in the 21st century. The man had wild, unkempt hair, and the woman's eyes seemed to pierce through the dim light. They welcomed me in, their smiles unnaturally wide. Inside, the air hung heavy with an indescribable tension. The dimly lit room revealed walls adorned with peculiar paintings, strange symbols that made my skin crawl. I thought, okay, maybe they're just into weird art, but something about those symbols felt off, like they held a meaning I wasn't meant to understand. They ushered me to the kitchen, a dimly lit space where the only sound was the hum of a flickering fluorescent light. As I handed over the chicken bucket, the woman's gaze locked onto mine, sending shivers down my spine. She whispered something to her husband, a language I couldn't identify, and they exchanged a knowing look. I mumbled something about enjoying the chicken and tried to make a quick exit, but they insisted I stay for a moment. The man pulled out an old, dusty photo album, the kind you find in your grandma's attic. As he flipped through the pages, I saw images of people in outdated clothing, frozen smiles that sent a chill through my bones. The woman leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper, telling me stories about each person in the photos. Tales of loss, tragedy, and strange occurrences. My discomfort grew with each passing word, and I could feel the weight of an unspoken secret hanging in the air. As I tried to excuse myself, the atmosphere shifted. The couple's smiles waned, replaced by an intensity that made me regret ever stepping foot into the house. They started talking about fate, destiny, and how every soul had a purpose. My purpose, apparently, was tied to the chicken I delivered. They handed me a small vial, a murky liquid swirling inside. The woman explained that it was a potion, a concoction of herbs and spices that had the power to reveal one's true purpose. All I had to do was drink it. Call it intuition or sheer survival instinct, but I politely declined, making up some excuse about a peanut allergy. As I left that house, the air outside felt colder, heavier. I glanced back, and through the window, I saw them, the odd couple, watching me, their eyes gleaming with something I couldn't comprehend. The door creaked shut behind me, and I practically sprinted back to my car, the chicken bucket clutched in my hand like a shield. The drive back to fried chicken heaven was a blur. My mind raced with questions, and the scent of crispy chicken that once comforted me now felt like a haunting reminder of that eerie encounter. I tried to convince myself it was just a strange couple with peculiar hobbies, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had glimpsed into something beyond my understanding. To this day, I avoid that part of town, and the mere thought of delivering chicken to mysterious addresses sends shivers down my spine. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. That's my life in a nutshell, but that night, everything spiraled into a twisted nightmare. I ordered some fast food, thinking it would be just another mundane dinner, but oh boy, how wrong I was. The delivery guy arrived, handed me the bag, and left without saying a word. No big deal, right? Until I opened the bag and found a note, written in that shaky, unsettling handwriting that screams trouble. I've been watching you. Your every move. Alone now, aren't you? Chills raced down my spine. I checked the windows, half expecting someone to be lurking outside. My apartment felt like a trap, the walls closing in on me. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was a sick prank, but the knot in my stomach told me otherwise. As I sat down to eat, paranoia wrapped its icy fingers around me. Every creak, every shadow seemed menacing. I double-checked the locks, pulled the curtains tight, and convinced myself it was just some sicko playing mind games. But the message lingered, staining the air with an unshakable dread. The night wore on, and with every passing hour, my nerves frayed a little more. I heard odd sounds, imagined whispers in the silence. The air in the room felt heavy, like I was being watched from the shadows. I even questioned my sanity, half expecting someone to jump out from the closet. As the clock ticked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being toyed with, that every move I made was observed. I wanted to call the police, but what could I tell them? Hey, someone sent me a creepy note with my burger, and now I'm losing it? I resorted to pacing the room, glancing over my shoulder at every sound. The walls seemed to close in, and I could feel eyes on me, even though logic screamed that I was alone. The note haunted my thoughts, the words etching themselves into my mind. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I mustered the courage to close my eyes. But sleep was elusive. Every creak, every distant noise jolted me awake. My mind played tricks on me, conjuring images of a faceless watcher. I was trapped in a waking nightmare of my own making. Morning arrived, but the sunlight brought little comfort. The note was still there, a grim reminder of the night's torment. I reported it to the police, but they shrugged it off, suggesting it might be a prank or a mistake. Yet, the fear lingered, staining the ordinary with a paranoia that refused to fade. Days turned into sleepless nights, my world shrinking with every passing moment. I installed security cameras, changed my locks, and even considered moving. But the unease persisted, an uninvited guest in the sanctuary of my own home. I never found out who sent that chilling note. Maybe it was a sick prank, maybe something more sinister. But the experience left scars, turning the mundane act of ordering dinner into a psychological horror that still haunts my every quiet moment. It was just a regular Wednesday evening, nothing special, nothing out of the ordinary. I decided to treat myself and ordered some mushroom chop suey and a special fried rice. You know, a midweek indulgence to break the monotony. Little did I know, that night would etch itself into my memory in the most horrifying way possible. The delivery estimates at 30 minutes, so I settled in, scrolling through my phone, waiting for that familiar knock on the door. When it came, I eagerly opened it, expecting my delightful feast. The delivery driver, though, was anything but what I anticipated. He stood there, a man in his 40s, with a slightly disheveled appearance. A name tag read John, and his eyes held a strange intensity. I took the bags from him, and as I handed over the money, he locked eyes with me in a way that sent shivers down my spine. I closed the door, thinking maybe I'd misread the situation. Maybe he was just having a bad day. I unpacked my dinner, but my appetite waned as I couldn't shake off that uneasy feeling. Something about the exchange felt off, and I couldn't put my finger on it. As I sat down to eat, my phone buzzed with a text. It was an unknown number, and the message was chilling. I hope you enjoy your meal, but remember, I know where you live now. My heart pounded in my chest as I read those words, my hand shaking with fear. I tried to reason with myself, thinking it was a sick prank or a wrong number. But deep down, I knew it was related to that unsettling encounter with the delivery guy. Panic set in, and I considered calling the police, but what could I tell them? A delivery driver gave me a weird look, and now I'm scared. The minutes crawled by, each one heavier than the last. Every creak in the house, every distant sound, felt like a harbinger of doom. I double-checked the locks, drew the curtains, and tried to convince myself it was just paranoia. Yet, that text lingered in the air like a threat. Sleep was out of the question. I kept imagining shadows outside my window, and every passing car's headlights felt like an impending threat. My safe space had turned into a prison, and I was the unwilling captive of my own fear. Morning brought little relief. I debated whether to go to work or stay hidden at home. The logical part of me insisted it was just a sick joke, but the knot in my stomach said otherwise. Every passing face on the street, every unfamiliar car, sent my mind into overdrive. Days turned into a nightmare of hyper-awareness. I questioned every person who approached my door, every unknown caller. I even changed my number, but the fear persisted, a constant companion in the mundane routines of life. I never found out who the delivery driver really was or why he decided to torment me. Maybe he was just a disturbed individual, or perhaps there was something more sinister at play. What I do know is that, from that night on, every delivery, every unfamiliar face, carries the weight of that chilling encounter. Cruising through the dimly lit streets with greasy bags of burgers and fries by my side. The pungent aroma filled my car as I navigated the maze of suburban roads. The occasional barking dog or flickering streetlight was the only disruption to the routine. As I approached an unfamiliar neighborhood, the GPS guiding me through a shortcut, I felt an uneasy knot in my stomach. It was like a sixth sense warning me that this wasn't going to be a typical delivery. I shook off the feeling, attributing it to the unfamiliar surroundings. Suddenly, red and blue lights flashed behind me, and my heart skipped a beat. I pulled over, the scent of fast food lingering in the air as the police cruiser parked behind me. Two figures approached, not in uniform, and my unease deepened. They were part of a local gang known for trouble. The taller one, his face masked by shadows, tapped on my window, his eyes cold and calculating. I rolled it down, and the stench of cigarette smoke and something else, something dangerous, filled the car. "Got a delivery for us, huh?" The shorter one smirked, revealing a gold tooth glinting in the streetlight. I stammered, explaining it was just food, and they chuckled as if they already knew. The taller one leaned in, too close for comfort. "Listen carefully, pal. We've been watching. We know every move. And tonight, you're gonna do us a little favor." They handed me an extra bag, sealed and heavy. "Deliver this to 17 Fairview Street. No games, no funny business." "Got it." The threat lingered in the air as they retreated to their cruiser, leaving me with the ominous task. Terrified, I continued down the poorly lit streets, the weight of that mysterious bag pressing on my conscience. Fairview Street felt like a descent into the unknown, the houses dilapidated, shadows dancing in the corners of my vision. As I approached the designated address, the unease intensified. The porch light flickered, casting an eerie glow on the cracked pavement. I hesitated, clutching the steering wheel, my mind racing. The bag felt like a Pandora's box of trouble, but I couldn't defy the silent threats that hung in the air. A figure emerged from the shadows, an ominous silhouette that seemed to absorb the feeble light. I handed over the bag without a word, the transaction feeling like a dart packed. The recipient's eyes, hollow and devoid of humanity, bore into mine, sending a shiver down my spine. As I drove away, the echoes of their laughter seemed to chase me, and the weight of guilt and fear settled in my gut. What had I just delivered? Why had I become an unwitting accomplice to whatever sinister plot was unfolding in that desolate corner of the city? Days turned into sleepless nights, haunted by the consequences of that fateful delivery. I contemplated going to the police, but the gang's threats echoed in my ears, paralyzing me with fear. I was trapped in a web of my own making, entangled in a sinister game where every knock on my door, every passing shadow, became a reminder of the darkness I'd unwillingly embraced. The night started like any other shift at Burger Bites, a nondescript fast food joint tucked away in the heart of the city. I was accustomed to the routine of taking orders, preparing meals, and navigating the dimly lit streets to deliver greasy delights to customers' doors. Little did I know that this mundane night would spiral into a harrowing ordeal that would haunt my nightmares. Around 10 p.m., a call came in for a delivery. The routine script played out as I answered the phone, noting down the address and the order details. But something was off. The voice on the other end was distorted, like it traveled through a warping tunnel. My instincts tingled with discomfort, but I shrugged it off as a technical glitch or a prank from a bored teenager. The order was for a simple combo meal, a burger, fries, and a soda, nothing out of the ordinary. Yet, the strange voice added an unsettling layer to the routine. The instructions, however, were what set this delivery apart. Leave it at the doorstep. Do not ring the bell. Do not linger. Someone will be watching, the voice instructed, each word dripping with an ominous undertone. A chill ran down my spine, but the allure of a tip and the need to meet the delivery quota pushed me to carry on. I grabbed the bag, ensuring the food was secure, and headed out into the night. The destination was an old apartment building on the outskirts of town, its facade weathered and worn. As I approached the dimly lit entrance, a sense of unease lingered. The distorted voice's instructions echoed in my mind. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the buzzer. An internal debate raged, Should I follow the peculiar instructions or trust my gut and ring the bell as usual? Opting for caution, I left the bag at the doorstep, my footsteps quickening as I retreated into the shadows. The moment the food left my hands, a weight lifted, and I convinced myself that it was merely an odd request from an eccentric customer. Little did I know, the night was far from over. As I walked back to my car, a sense of being watched settled over me. The apartment windows seemed to conceal eyes peering through the curtains. Paranoia took hold, and I quickened my pace. I glanced over my shoulder, catching fleeting shadows that seemed to dance in the periphery of my vision. The unsettling feeling escalated as I drove away. A glance in the rearview mirror revealed nothing but empty streets. The distorted voice's instructions played on a loop in my mind, raising questions about what sinister agenda lay behind the bizarre delivery request. Days passed, and the incident faded into the background of my routine. Until another call came, the distorted voice grating through the phone once again. This time, the instructions were more sinister, a location in an abandoned industrial area on the outskirts of town. Come alone. No police. No questions. Or there will be consequences. Dread hung in the air as I grappled with the decision to involve the authorities or comply with the ominous demand. Fear gnawed at me, the unknown consequences looming like a storm on the horizon. The distorted voice held a malevolent power, leaving me trapped in a nightmarish game. I found myself navigating the winding roads to the specified location, heart pounding in my chest. The industrial area was devoid of life, the skeletal remains of factories looming like silent sentinels. I parked the car, hands trembling as I clutched the steering wheel. The voice on the phone guided me through a maze of decrepit structures. Every step felt like a descent into a pit of darkness. The surroundings grew more desolate, the only sounds the echoes of my own footsteps and the distant hum of machinery. A sense of foreboding settled over me as I approached a dilapidated warehouse. The distorted voice's instructions led me inside, the interior shrouded in darkness. Flickering lights cast unsettling shadows on the walls. The pungent scent of decay hung in the air, adding to the surreal horror of the situation. The voice directed me to a lone chair in the center of the cavernous space. As I sat, the realization struck, I was a pawn in a macabre game orchestrated by a faceless tormentor. The distorted voice revealed fragments of a twisted agenda, hinting at consequences that left my imagination running wild. Fear and desperation clawed at me, and the boundaries between reality and nightmare blurred. In the chilling silence, footsteps echoed, growing louder with each passing moment. Figures emerged from the shadows, their faces obscured. They circled, their movements synchronized like a nightmarish dance. The distorted voice commanded compliance, threatening dire consequences for any deviation. Questions swirled in my mind. Who were these people, and what dark game had I unwittingly become a part of? The distorted voice held sway, a puppeteer orchestrating a sinister performance. Panic and despair coiled around me as the figures closed in. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the warehouse into darkness. The distorted voice erupted into maniacal laughter, a cacophony that echoed through the abyss. In the black void, I felt hands gripping, pulling, dragging me into an abyss of unknown horrors. The nightmare unfolded, a descent into madness orchestrated by a malevolent force. The distorted voice became a haunting melody, the laughter a chilling refrain. In that abyss, where reality and nightmare converged, I fought against the unseen assailants, desperation giving way to a primal instinct to survive. The distorted voice taunted, promising consequences for resistance. The struggle intensified, my breaths ragged, heart pounding like a drum heralding doom. In the darkness, I glimpsed fleeting shadows, figures with obscured faces, each movement accompanied by the haunting echoes of laughter. Suddenly, light pierced the darkness, blinding me for a moment. When vision returned, I found myself outside the warehouse, disoriented and gasping for breath. The distorted voice, now distant, warned of consequences should I speak of the night's events. Haunted by the surreal encounter, I stumbled back to my car. The industrial area, once a place of nightmare, now seemed eerily silent. As I drove away, the distorted voices' laughter echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder of the malevolent game I had unwillingly played. Days turned into sleepless nights, the distorted voices' warnings lingering in my thoughts. The ordeal left scars, both seen and unseen, a relentless reminder that the line between reality and nightmare is fragile. The mundane facade of fast food deliveries had shattered, revealing a dark underbelly where the ordinary could transform into a surreal nightmare. The distorted voice, the chilling encounters in abandoned places, the shadowy figures, all became a terrifying chapter etched into the fabric of my existence. The fear persisted, a constant companion in the mundane moments of life. The distorted voice's agenda remained a mystery, a puzzle with pieces that refused to fit.